Morning, good evening. I think we have at least a few people dialed in from the US, and I actually see one name I recognize from Europe, so that's quite impressive. Thanks for joining us. As I said, my name is Peter Tierney. I work for a company called Sacred Partners, and we are the representatives of FISD in Asia. The agenda for today is open protocols and how they're applied in the space of financial information. I'm not really the subject matter expert on this, but I'm going to take a minute or two to introduce ourselves and the topic and then hand over to our presenter today. As introduction, and apologies if all of you are very familiar with the acronyms on the screen there in front of you, but IPUG and FISD are the hosts of this session. IPUG, the Information Provider User Group, is a European advocacy group focused on the users of financial information. FISD is a global industry association, a not-for-profit based in Washington, D.C. that represents the interests of exchanges, data vendors, and consumers. So an association focused on financial information. In Asia, these two groups have agreed and have partnered and have been working together for the last 6 months to create a single group focused on promoting information sharing and the development of best practices for consumers of financial information. So your host today is the combination of IPUG and FISD, and our reason for doing this is at the request of our members, the consumers of financial information, to help increase awareness and ultimately generate some best practices around shared concerns and shared issues in our space. Open protocols is just one of a number of areas that we're working on. These areas were pointed to us by our members as areas that merited the focus from our side to bring together the industry and to share information and figure out if there's some benefit to be wrought by companies working together. Open protocols really focuses on efficiency and cost savings. The promise that open protocols bring is the concept of greater integration between our applications, less of a lock-in with specific vendor data sources, and ultimately a lower total cost of ownership. So connecting really the challenge of cost and efficiency with this whole move towards a more open and smoother integration between applications. There's a number of areas. Open protocols covers a very broad area. We're going to focus in on one particular area today, and if there's interest and this audience feel it's useful, we'll repeat sessions like this to include areas other than the API. So today's focus is really the integration point between a financial application and the data it needs to consume. Our objective is to explain the whole concept of an open API and hopefully through that promote a wider adoption of this particular corner of open protocols. Over a year ago, NYSE contributed a reasonably mature piece of software into the open source community. The API that they contributed has the unfortunate acronym of MAMA, or often called Mamba, and the initiative, the open source initiative, is referred to as Open Mamba. I take no responsibility for the branding there, but I guess the name has a reasonable amount of recognition and has stuck. The Open Mamba initiative is being driven and sponsored by companies like Bank of America Merrill Lynch, JP Morgan, vendors like IDC, EMC, Exigy. So it's the initiative to move this API into open source and make it widely available. It is being supported reasonably widely across the industry. This brings me to the introduction of our presenter today. Mike Schoenberg who's kindly dialed in Sunday evening his time in San Francisco, has a long career developing high-performance messaging applications. And most recently, or up until earlier this year, Mike worked for NYSE and was the original architect on the Mamba API. So from our point of view, very few people, if anyone, knows more about the architecture and the engineering behind this piece of software. Mike is also one of the team that caretakes the source code, or the application code that's deposited with the Linux Foundation. So while he has left NYSE, he still has some involvement and responsibility in the development of the Open Mamba initiative. I'll just finish with two disclaimers. This is a technology-heavy conversation, and I apologize in advance. While we were trying to make this as business user or commercial user friendly, I recognize that a lot of our members are from the commercial side of market data, but it is a technical topic, and I think worth expanding on. So apologies in advance if that's a little bit too nuts and bolts for people. As I said, Mike was a former employee of NYSE. I also worked with NYSE, but we want to be very clear. This presentation is in no way sponsored by or funded by or a result of effort from NYSE. This is an independent, neutral presentation on what's an open source initiative for the financial information industry. NYSE are aware of it and happy that the industry is talking about the Open Mamba initiative, but this is our conversation, hopefully to promote better understanding of an open source project. So that's my introduction. At this point, I'd like to hand over to Mike. Before I do that, I do want to draw your attention to the fact that this is recorded. The good news is that anyone who misses this or wishes to replay it, it'll be available. And if anyone is uncomfortable with being recorded, then now is the time to drop out. There is a chat facility that all of you should have. The chat is visible to Mike and I, and we will address questions. I'll triage the questions while Mike presents, and we'll address them as we go through. The voice will remain muted, so we will address your questions as they come in on the chat facility. I think that's it. Mike, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. As Peter said, my name is Mike Schoenberg. Actually, before I get started, I would like to thank Peter and IPUG and FISD to give me this opportunity to speak with you all about Open Mamba, something that I've spent a large portion of my career working on. In fact, the unfortunate acronym was the name that we chose nearly 10 years ago when I wrote the first implementation of the Mamba API, and it's the Middleware Agnostic Messaging API. And the founder of Wombat Financial Software was an ardent atheist, and so he tried his best to work the word agnostic into every product name for some time. So that's a little background on the name. What I would like to do is start off at a high level, talking about the benefits of Open Mamba and why we opened it, and the problem that it solves, and then spend the second part of the talk about the Mamba architecture, and then finish up with the conclusion and the roadmap for the project and going forward. And just a little more background on myself before I get started is, as Peter said, I worked for Wombat Financial Software and NYSE, where I wrote Mamba and then spent a lot of time developing high-performance message-oriented middlewares. And then sort of in my final project at NYSE was actually leading the technical effort, the technical side of the effort to open source Mamba and take the commercial product and turn it into an open source offering that's owned and run and developed by the open source community.
Just pause 1 second. I've had one question come in. Can someone just confirm, or can someone put their hand up there and confirm that everyone can hear what we're saying? I just want to make sure that the audio is coming through okay. Okay, I have hands raised. Thank you very much. Mike, continue on, please.
Yes. So, and since currently I'm no longer with NYSE, so I somewhat of a, although Open Mama is still something that's very near and dear to me, I am somewhat of a neutral, have a neutral perspective, and certainly in my new role at Quincy Data, where we're providing market data over wireless, we also are seriously considering using Open Mama for some of our in some of our products, both internally and as part of our offering. So it's something that I continue to be active in, and I think it's a very unique initiative in financial services. So hopefully you'll benefit from it. So as I said, it's the Open Mama is the open middleware agnostic messaging API. The process of taking it from a commercial product that had been in production for over 8 years to an open source offering took over a year. And the first source code was released to the open source community on October 31st of 2011. It is hosted by the Linux Foundation. So the Linux Foundation provides they are the foundation that also hosts the Linux kernel and sponsors Linus Torvalds and a number of other very important larger open source projects. And what they provide is they provide a neutral home for collaboration. The software is owned by the community and run by the community, and the Linux Foundation sponsors this and hosts it as a third neutral party. And I think that's very important in order to really increase the credibility and adoption. I think that a lot of companies, when they decide that they want to release something as open source, go it alone, and I think it's very hard for people in the community to really accept that and to think that it's truly open. And you see from time to time, large companies open sourcing a library or an API and then closing it again. And with the Linux Foundation as the host, this is not a risk with Open Mama. Open Mama provides a single API for event-driven messaging applications. And why it's important for this to be open source is that traditionally when you choose a messaging API, you're locked into that API, whether it's TIBCO Rendezvous or 29 West LBM or NYSE Data Fabric, you're locked into a single API, and changing, there's a very high barrier to exit. It's very difficult to change. And there's API lock-in and vendor lock-in, and it doesn't allow people to be agile and to move adopt new technologies more quickly, or to integrate new technologies with existing older technologies. And Open Mama is, as a commercial product, it's currently being used by over 150 users with multiple deployments for many of these users in the financial services space. So it's a pretty well established API. And just to be clear, the future there is only one Mama API. The NYSE Technologies, their release of Mama, the Open Mama Enterprise Edition, is built from the very same source code that's available in open source. So there's not two competing versions. There's one version. There's obviously, since it has been in production for so long, there are people who are on older versions that were pre-October 31st, 2011, but as they upgrade and migrate to the more recent versions, they will be using the same source code that you can download today from openmama.org. Right. So first, I've already spoken a little bit towards what the problem that OpenMama addresses and why it needs to be open source. Multiple middlewares with different interfaces present a huge problem in our industry and in other industries as well. There's no common language for messaging. It hinders communications both within a single enterprise and between participants. It's very hard for to integrate LBM with Rendezvous and these things, because people invest a lot of time and effort developing their applications, and then if they want to switch to a new, faster, or better, or more flexible middleware, they have to end up rewriting many, if not all, of their applications. Or to protect themselves about this, they write their own version, their own proprietary implementation of Mama, and that is very and that's very high maintenance. And one of the big benefits of open source is that people collaborate on the commodity software, on the things that don't differentiate them from one another. And for something like the Linux kernel, for example, no one wants to write their own operating system, but if everyone pitches in and writes the operating system, it frees their resources to work on the things that really add value and differentiate them from their competitors. So I see a question here, and I'll repeat it so everyone can hear. According to NYSE's white paper on OpenMama, their enterprise version will receive better support and patches. If this is independent of NYSE, how are the changes reconciled and guaranteed to be a community-driven product? That's a good question, and I don't have slides that really directly address the development process itself. But the way that all the patches to OpenMama are submitted over the OpenMama development emailing list, and the maintainers, and I'm myself being one of the co-maintainers, and the other maintainers either accept or reject or refine these patches, and once they're ready for acceptance, they go into OpenMama. Any changes that NYSE makes to OpenMama will be contributed through that mechanism. So So they won't receive better patches or patches that aren't available to the open source community. And part of the LGPL 2.1, the open source license that we've chosen, means that if it was chosen for a reason. The reason that we chose that particular license is that it allows people to use the OpenMama API and libraries and maintain ownership of their own personal intellectual property and software. So if you use OpenMama, you don't have to open source anything that uses it. However, if you change OpenMama and you choose to distribute that to someone else, the changes you make to OpenMama, source code, have to be distributed with that or contributed to the project. So any sort of patches that NYSE does will ultimately end up in the open source project. Okay, and let me move on. I have a fair amount to cover here, so I will. Okay, and so OpenMama solves the problems that I was speaking to previously. It eliminates the risk of vendor lock-in, because you can write your applications to a single API and switch between middlewares freely, and also deploy multiple middlewares at the same time, and even access multiple message-oriented middlewares from a single application. It reduces development costs. Firms are no longer in the position where they feel like they have to write their own complex and costly abstraction layers. It is designed for high performance. The actual critical paths through the API are very, very lean and add very little, less than a microsecond, so significantly less than a microsecond of overhead on the fast path when receiving messages. And as I said, it allows people to differentiate at the application level where it counts. Okay, so the next set of slides takes a little closer look at how OpenMama solves this problem. So this first slide shows a typical what you may find at a typical financial services company or a typical bank or hedge fund. In this case, we're using Rendezvous as the middleware, and where you have feed handlers and caches and algorithms all written directly to the Rendezvous API. And if you wanted in this instance to change and use LBM because you feel LBM provides better latency or scales better, or is, or for whatever reason, or you wish to integrate a third-party product that happens to not support Rendezvous but supports LBM, you wouldn't be able to do this across the board, because all of your applications being written to the Rendezvous API will now need to be rewritten to the LBM, the Informatica LBM API. And this is time-consuming and expensive, and really, in a lot of cases, prevents companies from really adopting the best solution and having to stick with the oldest. So, if, on the other hand, as you can see in this slide, you've written the application to OpenMama, or if you haven't already, you make the initial effort, which is, in OpenMama is very similar to other messaging APIs. So it's not a big effort to port. It's no more effort to port from Rendezvous to OpenMama than it is from Rendezvous to LBM. In this case, if you wanted to switch to a new middleware, actually I'm going to skip over this one and do that in OpenMama, you wouldn't have to rewrite your applications at all. You would simply install new middleware bridges, and you would have all of the various middlewares and products coexisting in a single environment. Right, and a word about OpenMama. Right now, in this diagram, we see three middlewares, one being Data Fabric, the other being Informatica LBM, and the third being Avis, which is an open source middleware. In order to use the middleware, it must have a bridge written to OpenMama, so that's part of it. And the middlewares themselves are commercial, except in this case for Avis, and there's also another, which is shown on the next slide. AMQP, there's an AMQP bridge that's been recently contributed by Red Hat to the OpenMama project for the Qubit implementation of AMQP. Right. And there's a question about where you purchase your licenses from, and as far as middleware bridges, and that really depends on who's developed the middleware bridge. So whichever, some firms, some middleware vendors will ultimately develop their own middleware bridges, and other, and NYSE Technologies provides a couple, and there will be open source bridges as well. And in fact, it's my hope that over time, all of the middleware vendors will choose to open source the bridge code as well, because it really doesn't add value, because once again, they're selling middleware, not the bridge API, or not even the API to the middleware. So without the middleware licenses, the bridge code is really of little value. So I mean, to sort of summarize that is what we feel is on this slide. On this slide, on the left-hand side, we see without OpenMama, you really end up with a siloed environment, and many firms that I'm aware of, and the company that I work for now, we count among them, will buy feed handlers and various products from different vendors, both either because they want best of breed, or because they want redundancy, or because there are simply products that aren't offered by specific vendors, and you end up with a siloed environment where you have systems that don't talk to each other. And as these vendors adopt OpenMama, that removes that siloed environment. Now you're free to integrate systems from different vendors and have them communicate over a single bus. And OpenMama is part of it. The messaging API is part of it. The other part of this problem, which I'm not going to go into in great detail, which is a sister project that's very closely tied to Open Mama, is the development of an open data model. And there's a parallel initiative for that, which is really something for another talk. So actually, we'll get back to some of these in more detail later. But just that Mamba is not just a messaging abstraction layer. It also adds support for a lot of features that are important for market data, including data quality support for gap detection and state recovery with initial values and recaps, a data dictionary support, which is tied to the idea of a data model and how to normalize the data and interpret and understand the data. And then it has implementation of other advanced features, which I'll go into a little bit more in a little more detail as I discuss the Open Mamba architecture. All right. Before I talk about the Open Mamba architecture, I suspect that most of you are very familiar with message-oriented middleware, but I will just quickly go over what message-oriented middleware is, from Open Mamba's perspective. It's topic-based, publish, subscribe. It's not really designed around message queuing or other implementations. So it's a topic-based, publish, subscribe, where publishers send messages on a given topic with broadcast semantics. Subscribers receive the message. Open Mamba does not currently support content-based messaging, but as an open source project, these are things that it may grow to accommodate over time if these are things that are important to the community. It also supports point-to-point request reply, where requests are broadcast and replies are sent to the requester point-to-point. And the messaging is essentially location independent. So publishers don't need to know how to find subscribers, and subscribers don't need to know how to find publishers. The middleware, the underlying middleware, needs to take care of all of these things. So at this point, I'd like to start discussing what Open Mamba actually looks like and what the architecture is, and how we put this all together to abstract and allow people the flexibility to use multiple middlewares. In this drawing, we'll actually start in the middle of this drawing. In the middle, you see the lower orange layer says Open Mamba C, and the core of Open Mamba is implemented in C as a C API, and it's fairly efficient, and people are free to write applications to the Open Mamba C API. That's really the lowest level public interface presented by Mamba. But where the real interesting work happens below that in the two bridge APIs. We have a message bridge API, which abstracts and bridges to the underlying message-oriented middlewares. And then we have a payload bridge API, which provides a consistent interface to allow support for multiple self-describing message formats. Currently, there are a number of commercial and open source messaging bridges written. One for Avis, which used to be Elvin, which is a rather old, and I believe it's going to be end-of-life middleware. It was done because there was a bridge for it originally, so it was an easy open source bridge for us to do. But there's also now, which is not shown on this diagram, a Cupid bridge for AMQP, which I think will become the standard open source middleware bridge. There's a bridge for NYSE Data Fabric, TIBCO Rendezvous, and Informatica LBM. You are absolutely free to write your own middleware bridges, use them in-house, or open source them if you wish. For those of you who wish to write your own middlewares, which I would not encourage, but if that's something that you want to do. Choosing to use Mamba as an API gives you a lot of flexibility and reduces risk because it would allow you to integrate with other middlewares or to switch to another middleware at some point in time. And for the payload bridges, currently there's an Avis payload bridge, which is an open source bridge. There is work being done right now for an AMQP payload bridge. One of the things that I would like to see happen, but we need to find a resource in the community willing to do it, would be a Google Protocol Buffers bridge for payloads. And there are proprietary messaging bridges as well. And just a word about the payloads and the middleware. A lot of the features and the performance and the features of OpenMama are often dictated by the underlying middleware and payload bridges. So OpenMama will support messages as large as the payload bridge will support. It also has support for very complex messages, so the messages can be structured. It supports arrays of primitive types like floats and ints, as well as nested messages, and you can build very complex structures. It's very flexible in terms of what types of payloads it supports. And above Mama, we have the higher level interfaces. So we have a JNI implementation for Java. There has been some significant interest in the open source community for a pure Java implementation as well. And I hopefully we'll see some progress on that in the future. There's also a C++ interface and .NET. And then on top of Mama, there's also the Open Mamba API. And once again, Mamba stands for Middleware Agnostic Market Data API. And that is an object-oriented framework for writing market data applications. And it's available in C++, Java, and .NET. And I'll provide a little more detail on that later. And then people write their applications either to Mamba or one of the Mamba language bindings. Okay, so before I go on into more details about the underlying structures in the Mamba API, we'll talk a little bit about the messaging transports that are available. There's several UDP multicast implementations, including AMQP, TIBCO Rendezvous, and LBM. There's TCP middleware and TCP RDMA, shared memory, and verb-based middleware provided by NYSE and multiple other vendors as well. So Data Fabric from NYSE supports TCP RDMA, shared memory, and verbs. Rendezvous is multicast, LBM is multicast, and shared memory, I believe, as well. The Cupid bridge, which is no longer under development, it has been released and contributed to the project at this point. The slide's a little dated. There is also Exegy is providing an OpenMama interface for their ticker plant. And very recently, Les Spiro at TIC42 released an open source Bloomberg bridge. And when I talk about the roadmap, we'll talk a little bit more about plans on integrating with other market data vendors and systems as well. So just to jump around, going back to the architecture, in terms of writing OpenMama applications, probably the central construct is the transport. And the transport establishes connections between publishers and subscribers. And the mechanism, this is really the part that varies the most between different middlewares. So for some middlewares like Data Fabric use a naming service daemon sort of as a central repository for looking up topic information. Things like Rendezvous and Avis and AMQP are broker-based. And then Informatica uses a different approach where they do topic resolution over multicast. The transport is also the part of the Mamba API where most of the configuration and tuning and things usually get tied to. And I think one of the important things about Mamba is that the configuration mechanism through properties files allows you to have a very high-level abstract API where you don't have to know anything about the underlying middleware. But the configuration, on the other hand, allows you to, on a transport-by-transport basis, set configuration parameters that are middleware specific. So you can, for your environment, if you need to set a buffer size or a batching interval or something like that, if there are features in the underlying middleware that you need control over, they're done through configuration rather than through the API itself. But that said, you can do configuration through the API, so it can be done dynamically. But but anything that's middleware specific is really a configuration concern, so that the actual application and business logic of your application can remain middleware independent. OpenMama uses a queue-based threading model. So in addition to transports, applications will all create one or more queues with one thread dispatching per queue. It supports several dispatch modes. Either a single event's triggered when you and the dispatch returns. You can have time dispatch or dispatch forever. It also supports advanced queuing features like watermarks and enqueuing, and a callback-based mechanism to integrate with other event loops. One of the important things about OpenMama is not all middlewares actually have the notion of a queue. And in order to support that, the OpenMama project has a generic queue implementation that bridge implementers can use if their middleware doesn't support queues, or if they feel that the queuing mechanism in OpenMama is better for some reason. So in addition to transports and queues, every application or many applications create publishers, and ones that don't create publishers will obviously create subscribers. And publishers send messages and requests. The idiom in Mama is there's one publisher object or one instance created per topic. Publishers are associated with a specific transport. So if you have a publisher for IBM publishing over Rendezvous, and in the same application you wanted to publish that same information over AMQP, you would actually need two publishers. The publishers don't span different transports. Once again, to the point that it's high performance, it's the publisher in particular is a very good example of a thin wrapper around the native publishing. For most middlewares, it's actually just a one or two, maybe a 2 or 3 line function that basically directly calls the underlying middleware. If I have time, I'll talk a little bit about the advanced publishing framework on a later slide. And in addition to publishers, you obviously have subscriptions. The subscriptions are once again per topic. They receive their messages from all publishers on a given topic, so you can have multiple publishers on the same topic, either within a single application or spanning multiple applications. There's optional wildcard support for publishers. Some middlewares, so if a middleware supports wildcard subscriptions, OpenMama is able to handle that. And the OpenMama API, showing its market data routes, has what we call a basic and a market data subscription. I've been pushing people to change it to stateful because I think that there are possibly other applications for market data subscriptions. Market data subscription is simply a subscription that receives initial state in the form of an initial value before it starts processing a messaging stream. And then the notion of an inbox is what Mama calls its request-reply mechanism. So it's point-to-point subscription. The replies are received through the same on-message callback mechanism, but in this case, the subscribing application sends a request, and that request can be received by one or more applications, and one or more of those applications can choose to reply point-to-point to the publisher. and the mechanism supports both multiple requests and multiple replies from multiple publishers. And this is the mechanism that's used for sending initial values and recaps in a market data environment. Other middleware constructs that we support are timers. OpenMama has the notion of a repeating timer, so you create a timer for an interval, and it will then fire repeatedly during that interval. The many middlewares also support timers, so the resolution of these timers will be dependent on both the native middleware or the operating system, depending on how they're implemented. Once again, for middlewares that don't have a built-in timer functionality, the OpenMama project itself has a generic default timer mechanism that can be integrated with other middlewares. And finally, as far as basic functionality, we have support for I/O events, which is really a mechanism. It's an add-on to Mamba that allows applications to, in the same event loop, using the same queues and dispatchers, process asynchronous I/O events on file descriptors. So if you need to do socket I/O or file I/O within the same thread that you're processing incoming market data or messages, you can do that quite easily with OpenMama. I believe that currently there is no generic support in the current OpenMama distribution to integrate I/O events with middlewares that don't support them, but it's something that could be quite easily done, and I suspect will be done in the near future. And now just a couple words before on the other components before I move on. I mentioned stateful market data subscriptions. We also have the Advanced Publishing Framework. What the Advanced Publishing Framework allows people to do is to write something that looks a lot like a feed handler and facilitates this. So it gives you the basic framework to write an application that publishes data on multiple topics, receives subscription requests, so it can turn publishers on and off based on whether there's interest out there, and it uses and to help gauge that interest, it uses a refresh mechanism where it gets refreshes from the subscribers, and when the refreshes stop coming, it can actually stop publishing on a topic. There's a fair amount of sophisticated support for writing simple feed handlers, and I think that a lot of people who I've dealt with and have found it very useful, because it takes a lot of the tedious work away from that. I mentioned the data dictionary before. The data dictionary maps field names and data types to field IDs and allows you, without knowing the contents of a message, to iterate through the message, determine what the contents are and what the data types for the various fields are as well. And OpenMama also provides basic fault tolerance. What it provides is a framework that allows you to run hot-cold fault-tolerant pairs of your applications, and the primary and secondary, or the hot and cold pair, communicate to one another over multicast with a heartbeat mechanism, so that when the primary fails, the secondary can take over, and you could restart the primary, and it'll restart as a secondary. And once again, I think that's something that's very nice that people would have to generally implement on their own, and can be somewhat tricky. And finally, just a little more. I don't really have time to go into details about OpenMamba, but it's part of the OpenMama project. It's also licensed under the LGPL. Once again, the entirety of Mamba was was open sourced and is hosted by the Linux Foundation. It's built on top of OpenMama. It's an object, and it provides direct support. And rather than dealing with messages and subscriptions, with messages and fields, you deal with trades and quotes and order books and option chains. And in many cases, it's obviously it's another layer. So the performance is not Not as good as it is with OpenMama, but it's still very good. It has been optimized, and it's fairly quick, but it allows you to write market data applications much more easily and quickly without having to understand understand messaging. And the final thing about Open Mamba is the open data model, that Open Mamba will eventually become the reference implementation of the open data model, which, as I mentioned before, is a related project that what we're trying to do is come up with an open standard that describes content. So what we're really trying to do with Mama standardizes how we communicate, the protocol and the underlying how we send messages and how applications do that. And Mamba is really trying to develop a common language for messaging, so that once all our applications can send messages back and forth to one another, we can also format those messages in a way that we can all understand them. All right, so before I finish up, I'd like to talk a little bit about the goals and the roadmap for OpenMama. As I said, it was open sourced in October of 2011. And it's been open for nearly a year. There's been, a lot of effort has gone into it. Not just has it been was the primary focus for several years of my life. There are many other developers and members of the steering committee and people who've been tirelessly contributing to make this happen. So currently, what the architecture looks like, we have OpenMama, and one thing I didn't mention, and I believe there's some questions about it, is that there is entitlement support within OpenMama. Currently, it's hard-coded in, and however, there are plans in the near future to turn the entitlement support into another bridge. So you could imagine at the bottom where we have a middleware bridge and a message bridge, that we would also have an entitlements bridge and the ability to support multiple entitlement systems. However, with the current release of OpenMama, if you wanted to integrate your own entitlement system, the hooks, the places where entitlements are enforced are very few, so you could probably do that quite easily even without a separate bridge architecture for it. Yep, and recently we've released the Bloomberg API was released by TIC42, and the Cupid and AMQP bridge was contributed by Red Hat to the open source project as well. Right, so a lot of what we're trying to do with the project right now is to really build interest and get people broader adoption. So to really get people to adopt it and to use it and to contribute. So we've been recruiting various vendors. So you could see the likes of Rye Technologies, Exegy, TIC42. There are a number of vendors. The steering committee has EMC and IBM, who are also involved in the project. So we expect to see contributions from them as well. And we want to continue also our support for an open source messaging solution, because we feel that one of the things that really needs to happen to get full adoption has already started. So we have the Cupid bridge and Proton is the newest release of Cupid for the AMQP for an AMQP middleware, which really gives a credible open source messaging solution for OpenMama. And we're hard at work right now developing an open source payload as well, one based on the Cupid payload. As I said, I'd like to see other open source payloads. We're also doing a big initiative to try to develop an open source data source, and whether that's something that plays some canned data, or I think that's something that we're trying to work out and we're exploring, because what we would like to see is people to be able to go out and download something and make it work and use it, and there are a lot of pieces that are required for that. As part of the open source project, we're also building out a hosting infrastructure for both for a sandbox and self-certification, and also for continuous integration. So as people contribute changes, these changes will be tested and built on an ongoing and real-time basis. And finally, I think the most important thing is we're looking at trying to integrate with other market data platforms. Obviously, the Bloomberg Bridge is a major success and step in the right direction. But we would like to integrate with other market data platforms as well. I think we have a vision in the future with Open Mamba, not just supporting being the reference implementation of a single data model, but becoming a layer that allows you to plug multiple data models in, or select a data model, or even translate between two different data models. But these are things that we're currently working on and considering, and so just moving on, we're right out of time, so I'd like to just conclude. I think the importance of having an open solution as opposed to a commercial one or a proprietary one. Through this experience, I've become a very enthusiastic advocate of open source, is because it allows all of us, everyone on this call and everyone in the community, to drive the direction of it by participating, by either contributing directly to the project or joining the steering committee, implementing bridges or building products based on it. But it allows the people who use the software to really take control of the direction and make it better. And rather than being locked into a vendor or locked into an API, it really frees people up to contribute to it and to innovate and to share the effort, because it's a lot of work for any single organization, but as a large group, I think it's really not that much. So finally, I'd like to just encourage anyone who's interested to try to participate. And anyone's free. You can do it on your own. Companies or can contribute resources. And by resources, it's not just writing code. It could be fixing bugs, documentation, contributing new features, or just contributing to discussions on the mailing list. So if you go to www.openmama.org, we have a number of mailing lists there for developers, for users. We also have information about joining the steering committee and various initiatives. So I encourage all of you to take a look and hopefully contribute at some point. Thank you.
Thanks a million. That's been very, very interesting. I've been triaging questions as they came in. I think you've been doing a good job of actually dealing with them on the fly. I'll just pick one or two that are left that you might have covered and I didn't pick up on, if that's okay. So how complex can the message structure be with Open Mama?
So it can really be arbitrarily complex. As I said, it's really dictated by the underlying middleware. So some middlewares like Avis have very sort of, well, I'll just be honest, retarded message structures where you can't do a lot. But certainly the API and things. So some of the so Wombat Message, for example, which is a proprietary message format, supports nested messages, vectors of messages, vectors of all data types. So you can really, it's really a giant hash table of fields. So it'll support arbitrarily complex messages.
Okay, and there's a couple of questions. I think that the theme of the questions are, is it live? Are there people using Open Mama in a production setting today?
Yes, they are. So certainly, the 150 plus people, Mama users, obviously many of those are the users. We're users of the commercial Mama, but those people are also using Open Mama. The source code is literally the same, and it is a commercial offering. So it is certainly in production and being used now at a number of firms, and it will continue to be used as the existing Mama user base transitions to Open Mama, because Mama has been end of life, and and Open Mama has now replaced it. So it certainly it certainly is. I consider it to be production software. It is not beta or something new. This is software that I started writing in 2002. So it's been and it's it's the same and it is the same software.
Very good, very good. Okay, I think we'll try to draw a line underneath that. It's been, I think, very, very useful. Again, thanks for taking time on your Sunday evening to do this.
Oh, no worries.
Again, draw everyone's attention to it. This is an open source initiative. It's an effort to try and introduce a degree of decoupling between proprietary middlewares and your applications, and essentially reduce the cost of ownership for those applications. So I encourage you to support it, to contribute as you can. Just a reminder, IPUG and FISD are basically associations, industry associations. We're member driven. If you need more information about us, I've just sent a note on the chat there with a link for FISD. You can drop me an email at peter@sagebrushpartners.com. That's on there as well. I appreciate that this was brief, but hopefully it's enough detail to get people's interests, increase understanding a little bit, so you know what's there and how it can be used. And after that, there's plenty of resources between the websites and the people there to help you move it forward. Our intention is to run a number of open protocol sessions. We focused on the API today, possibly on the Mamba, Open Mamba initiative. Symbology has been an area that people wanted to talk about. So again, if you have suggestions for other corners of the open protocol conundrum and areas where you see progress being made, we're happy to showcase it and to just generally raise the awareness and understanding. So with that, I think I'll conclude the call. Please contact us if you feel you have other questions that weren't answered or other topics you'd like us to address. Have a good day. Thank you very much.
Bye.